The dust hadn't settled from the morning stage when Elena Carter stepped down onto the packed earth of San Judas's main street. She steadied her camera equipment with practiced hands, ignoring the whispers that rippled through the gathered townsfolk like wind through dry grass. "That the photographer from back east," someone muttered. "Wearing trousers like a man," came the scandalized reply. Elena had heard it all before, from Topeka to Tucson. The reaction was always the same. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat against the Arizona sun and surveyed the town that would be her home for the next few weeks. San Judas squatted between red rock mesas and silver-gray desert, a collection of adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that seemed to huddle together against the vastness of the territory. The boarding house stood 2 buildings down from the sheriff's office, its painted sign reading, "Mrs. Henley's Respectable Lodgings." Elena hefted her equipment case and made her way toward it, dust swirling around her boots with each step. "Ma'am." The voice was quiet, but carried weight. Elena turned to find a man standing near the hitching post, his hat tilted back enough to reveal weathered features and dark eyes that held no judgment. Unlike the other men who'd been staring, this one simply tipped his hat and moved to help with her heavy case without being asked. "I can manage," Elena said automatically. "I'm sure you can." He stepped back, hands raised slightly. "Wyatt Hale. I run cattle out by Coyote Draw." "Elena Carter, photographer." His eyes flicked to her trousers, but he said nothing about them. "Welcome to San Judas, Miss Carter. Watch yourself around Sheriff Pike. He's particular about maintaining order." Before Elena could ask what he meant, Wyatt touched his hat brim again and headed toward the general store, spurs ringing softly against the boardwalk. Inside, Mrs. Henley's, Elena found the proprietress to be a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and sharper opinions. "I run a Christian establishment, Mrs. Henley declared, looking pointedly at Elena's attire. "I'll tolerate your unusual dress for the sake of your profession, but I won't have any scandal under my roof." "I'm here to document life in the territories, nothing more," Elena assured her, paying a week in advance. Her room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the back alley. Elena set up her portable darkroom supplies in the corner, checking each bottle of chemical by the afternoon light. Tomorrow she'd begin her work, capturing the true West, not the dime novel version folks back east gobbled up, but the real thing, the sweat, the struggle, the souls carved hard by sun and circumstance. A commotion in the street drew her to the window. Through the dusty glass, she saw a well-dressed man in a black suit standing before a small crowd. His voice carried even to the second floor. "So, bringing prosperity to San Judas, the railroad will transform this territory, and Crow Enterprises will ensure every citizen benefits." Silas Crow. Elena had heard the name in Tucson, mining magnate, railroad investor, and according to some, a man who collected land deeds the way others collected scalps. She grabbed her camera and plates. This was exactly the kind of scene she needed to document. By the time she reached the street, Crow was shaking hands with prominent townsmen while his employees handed out printed circulars. Elena set up her camera at the edge of the crowd, adjusting the bellows and preparing a plate through her ground glass. She watched Crow's practiced smile, the way his eyes calculated even as his mouth promised prosperity. She was about to take the exposure when movement behind the crowd caught her attention. 2 men in worn dusters were unloading something from a wagon near the old mission, heavy crates that they handled with excessive care. Elena shifted her camera angle slightly. Whatever those crates contained, the men clearly didn't want them noticed. The plate exposed. Elena was packing her equipment when a hand fell on her shoulder. "What do you think you're doing?" Sheriff Abner Pike stood behind her, badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. He was a thick-set man with pale eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently turned down at the corners. "Taking photographs," Elena replied evenly. "It's my profession." Dressed like that, Pike's gaze traveled from her hat to her boots with obvious disgust. We have ordinances about proper attire in this town. I wasn't aware photography required a dress code. Sheriff. His grip on her shoulder tightened. Don't get smart with me, woman. You're disturbing a lawful assembly. She's doing no such thing. Wyatt Hale had appeared as quietly as morning mist. He stood relaxed but ready, hand resting casual-like near his holster. Pike released Elena's shoulder. This ain't your concern. Hale. Public street, public gathering. Wyatt's voice remained mild. Lady's got as much right to make her living as anyone. For a moment, the two men locked eyes. Then Pike spat tobacco juice dangerously close to Elena's boots. You watch yourself. Miss Carter, this is a civilized town. We don't cotton to troublemakers. After Pike stalked off, Elena found herself reassessing the quiet cattleman. Thank you, Mr. Hale, but I can handle myself. Never doubted it. He glanced at her camera. You might want to develop that plate quick-like. Interesting things tend to disappear in this town. That evening, in the makeshift darkroom of her boarding house, Elena understood what Wyatt meant. The developed plate showed not just crows gathering, but in the background, clear as desert starlight, those two men in their crates. The wooden boxes bore the unmistakable marking of dynamite, and partially visible on one crate was the stenciled logo of Crow Enterprises. More intriguing still was what she noticed near the old Mission Wall survey stakes driven into the ground. Fresh earth suggested they'd been placed recently. And if Elena's knowledge of territory law was correct, those stakes were claiming land that already belonged to someone else. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Henley's voice came through the door. Miss Carter, there's a gentleman to see you. A Mr. Crow. Elena carefully stored the plate in her protective case before descending to the parlor. Silas Crow sat in Mrs. Henley's best chair like a king holding court. He was perhaps 50, with silver at his temples and the soft look of a man who hired others to do his sweating. Miss Carter. He rose, all courtesy. I apologize for the impropriety of calling at this hour, but I'm leaving for Prescott in the morning. What can I do for you, Mr. Crow? His smile was practiced as a poker player's. I understand you're creating a photographic record of our territory. Admirable work. I'd like to commission you to document my various enterprises. The railroad construction, the mining operations, history in the making. That's generous, but I prefer to choose my own subjects. Of course. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather wallet. Perhaps I wasn't clear. I'd like to purchase exclusive rights to your work while you're in San Judas, including whatever you've already captured. The amount he named would fund her work for a year. Elena kept her face neutral. My plates aren't for sale. Mr. Crow. His eyes hardened, though his smile remained. Everything's for sale. Miss Carter, it's simply a matter of price. Then we have different philosophies. Good evening. After he left, Mrs. Henley clutched at Elena's sleeve. You shouldn't have refused him. Mr. Crow is a powerful man. Powerful men are exactly who should be documented. Mrs. Henley, without their permission. That night, Elena wedged a chair against her door and slept with her plate case under her bed. Through her window came the sounds of San Judas after dark saloon music. Distant laughter, the occasional gunshot. But there was another sound too, one that made her skin prickle. Footsteps in the alley below, pacing back and forth like a wolf testing the boundaries of a camp. When dawn finally painted the mountains pink, Elena found fresh boot prints in the dust beneath her window. Large prints, with a distinctive worn heel. Someone had stood there half the night, watching. She was examining the prints when Wyatt Hale rounded the corner leading a pack horse. Early morning, he asked. Elena showed him the tracks. His face darkened. Those are Charlie Moss's boots. Works for Crow. Wyatt studied the window, calculating angles. You might want to find somewhere else to develop your plates. Somewhere with fewer eyes. Are you offering My place is a half-day's ride. Got a spring house that stays dark and cool. You'd be welcome to use it." He paused. Folks around here respect property lines. Mostly. Elena considered. Town was no longer safe. That much was clear. And there was something about Wyatt Hale, a steadiness that reminded her of bedrock. "I'll need to gather my supplies." "I'll wait." As Elena packed, she reflected on how quickly San Judas had shown its true nature. But then, that was what she'd come to document, the real West, with all its shadows and sharp edges. She just hadn't expected to find herself part of the story. When Sheriff Pike arrived at the boarding house an hour later with a warrant to search for seditious materials, Elena Carter was already gone, riding toward Coyote Draw with her plates secure in her saddlebags and the morning sun painting their backs gold. Behind them, Charlie Moss stood in the empty room, holding the chair she'd used to block the door. His report to Silas Crow would be brief but troubling. The photographer woman had vanished. And worse, she'd gone with Wyatt Hale, the one rancher who'd refused to sell his water rights. In the desert between San Judas and Coyote Draw, Elena rode beside Wyatt in companionable silence, her camera equipment balanced on the pack horse. Every few miles, he'd point out some landmark, a lightning-struck cottonwood, a cluster of ancient saguaros, the bones of some long-dead thing bleached white as aged paper. "Storm coming," he said eventually, studying the northern horizon where clouds piled up like dark wool. Elena had lived through prairie storms and mountain squalls, but there was something different in how Wyatt read the sky, a wariness that went beyond weather. "How long before it hits?" "Hour, maybe less. We'll need shelter." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, the metallic taste that preceded violence, whether from nature or man. Elena pulled her hat down tight and urged her horse to match Wyatt's quickening pace. Behind them, lost in the growing dust, 3 riders followed at a careful distance. They'd been there since the edge of town, patient as buzzards, waiting for their moment. The storm was coming, in more ways than one. The storm hit like a fist. One moment Elena could see the trail ahead, the next, the world turned brown as a wall of dust engulfed them. Sand stung exposed skin like angry wasps, and the horses whinnied in distress, fighting their bits. "Stay close." Wyatt's voice barely carried over the howling wind. He grabbed the lead rope of the pack horse and gestured for Elena to follow. She pulled her kerchief over her nose and mouth, squinting against the assault. Her horse stumbled, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought they'd go down. Then Wyatt's hand caught her reins, steadying both mount and rider. Through the chaos, he led them off the trail into a maze of red rock formations. The wind screamed between the stones, but Wyatt moved with purpose, following some path invisible to Elena's dust-blinded eyes. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, they ducked into a narrow canyon where the storm's fury diminished to a dull roar. "Here." Wyatt dismounted and helped Elena down. Her legs shook from gripping the saddle. The canyon widened into a natural shelter, an overhang of rock creating a cave-like space large enough for them and the horses. Ancient fire circles suggested others had found refuge here over the years. Travelers, natives, outlaws, perhaps. Elena helped unsaddle the horses while Wyatt checked the animals for injuries. His hands were gentle as he ran them over each leg, murmuring soft words in what sounded like Choctaw. The horses calmed under his touch, their breathing steadying despite the storm raging beyond their shelter. "Your mother's language?" Elena asked, shaking dust from a saddle blanket. Wyatt glanced up, surprised. Most people pretended not to notice his mixed heritage, or worse, made it a point of contempt. "She taught me some before." He trailed off, focusing on picking a stone from his mare's hoof. Elena didn't press. She'd learned that the important stories came in their own time, like good photographs developing in the chemical bath. They made a rough camp against the back wall. Elena's clothes were heavy with dust, her hair gritty beneath her hat despite the kerchief. She watched Wyatt produce a small fire from seemingly nothing dried grass from a pack, matches kept in an oilskin pouch, kindling gathered from the shelter's corners. "You've used this place before," she observed. "Everyone who runs cattle out here knows the bolt holes." He fed the tiny flame carefully. "Storms, Apache raids back in the day, or sometimes you just need a place to think." The firelight pushed back the gloom, revealing petroglyphs on the rock walls, spirals, handprints, figures that might have been men or gods. Elena's fingers itched for her camera, but this wasn't the time. "Tell me about Coyote Draw," she said instead, settling onto her spread blanket. Wyatt considered while arranging their meager supplies: jerky, hardtack, 2 canteens of water. "My mother's people called it where water sings. There's a spring that runs year-round, comes up through the rocks and makes this sound." He paused, almost smiled, like a woman humming while she works. "And Crow wants it. Crow wants everything." The almost smile vanished. "But water most of all. Control the water out here. You control life itself." Elena thought of the dynamite crates in her photograph, the survey stakes by the mission. "Those stakes I photographed, whose land were they on?" "The Delgado family. Their grant goes back to Spanish times. But paper from 100 years ago don't mean much when someone's got a judge in their pocket and thugs on payroll." The storm's howl intensified, and fine dust sifted through cracks in the rock. Elena pulled out her plate case, checking the seals. The glass negatives were intact, wrapped in chamois and nested in their slots. "May I?" Wyatt gestured to the case. She hesitated. Photographers guarded their work jealously, then nodded. He examined the construction with the same careful attention he'd shown the horses. Good craftsmanship, tight joints, proper padding. He handed it back. "My mother would have appreciated this. She kept a book, drew pictures of plants, animals, said it was important to remember." "What happened to it?" "Burned with everything else when the army came through." His voice was flat as the desert. "Removal Act of 31. Didn't matter that my father was white. Had legal claim to the land. Indian blood made us removable." Elena had read about the removals in Eastern papers. Sanitized accounts of necessary relocation. The reality sitting across from her was different. A man shaped by loss, who'd somehow built something new from the ashes. "But you came back. Took 15 years, worked cattle drives, saved every cent. When I had enough, I bought land near where our old place stood. Legal this time. Papers filed proper in Prescott." He poked the fire with a stick. "Course, legal don't mean much if men like Crow decide they want what you've got." Thunder crashed overhead, though no rain came. Dry storm. Elena realized, all fury and no relief, like a lot of things in the territory. "In my experience," she said carefully, "men like Crow hate 2 things most, being told no and having their business documented." Wyatt's dark eyes met hers across the fire. "That why you're really here, not just taking pretty pictures for folks back east?" "Pretty pictures don't tell the truth. They show what people want to see: noble savages, brave pioneers, manifest destiny wrapped up in sepia tones." Elena's hands clenched. "I want to show what's real, the cost of all this progress everyone's so proud of." Dangerous work. So's ranching near Silas Crow. That earned her an actual smile, small but genuine. "Fair point." They sat in companionable silence while the storm raged. Elena found herself studying Wyatt's profile in the firelight, the strong jaw, the lines carved by sun and wind, the way his hands stayed still unless there was purpose in moving them. He'd make a good photograph, she thought, then pushed the notion aside. Some things weren't meant to be captured. "Storm's passing," he said eventually. Sure enough, the howling had diminished to a whisper. They ventured to the canyon mouth to find the world transformed. Dust hung in the air like fog, turning the late afternoon sun into a copper disk. The landscape looked scoured, familiar landmarks erased or shifted. Trails gone, Elena observed. Always is after a blow like that, but the stars don't change. Wyatt pointed to the mountains. Coyote draws that way. About 3 hours in good conditions. We'll camp here tonight. Move at first light. They tended the horses, sharing their water carefully. Elena watched Wyatt portion out grain from his saddlebags, giving his mare the smallest share. She's used to hardship, he explained. The others need it more. This, too, was the real West. Not the gunfights and glory of dime novels, but the small sacrifices, the careful husbanding of resources, the knowledge that survival often came down to such calculations. As darkness fell, they prepared a simple meal. Elena contributed tinned peaches from her supplies, a luxury that made Wyatt's eyes widen slightly. They ate slowly, savoring the sweetness after the day's grit. My mother loved peaches, he said suddenly. There was a tree at the agency where they sent us. She'd stand under it for hours, just breathing in the smell when it bloomed. Did she ever get to taste the fruit? No, died that spring, before they ripened. He set down his empty tin. Fever took half the people there. Not enough food. Too many bodies packed together, bad water. Elena heard what he didn't say. That his mother might have lived if she'd stayed on their land, drinking from clean springs, gathering traditional medicines instead of waiting for agency doctors who never had enough supplies. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But the way he stared into the fire suggested otherwise. Elena pulled out the oilskin packet where she kept her personal papers and extracted a small item. This was my father's. She held out a compass, its brass case worn smooth. He was a surveyor for the railroad, honest one, which got him killed when he refused to falsify a report about unsafe grades. Wyatt accepted the compass, turning it in the firelight. Railroad company. They said it was bandits, but bandits don't usually leave gold watches and take surveying notes. She took the compass back, feeling its familiar weight. That's when I decided pictures could do what words couldn't, show truth in a way that can't be argued with. Unless someone burns the pictures. That's why I make multiple plates, hide them in different places, mail copies to newspapers back east. She smiled grimly. Harder to burn down the truth when it's scattered like seeds. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The fire had burned low, casting more shadows than light. Wyatt added the last of their gathered wood. Those men following us from town. Elena said, they still out there. Probably holed up like us. Charlie Moss is mean but not stupid. He won't risk the horses in this mess. Will they follow us to Coyote Draw? Not onto my land. Not yet, anyway. Wyatt's hand brushed his holster. But they'll be watching. Crow likes to know what his enemies are doing. Is that what we are enemies? Minute you said no to him, you became one. Minute I refused to sell water rights, I became another. He looked at her steadily. Question is, what do we do about it? Elena thought of the plate in her case, the damning image of dynamite crates and illegal survey stakes. We do what they don't expect. We use the law. Law belongs to whoever pays the judges. Federal law is different, and I know a marshal in Prescott who owes my father's memory a debt. She leaned forward. But we need more than one photograph. We need a pattern, evidence that can't be dismissed. And you think you'll find that at Coyote Draw? I think men like Crow can't help themselves. They take and take until someone stops them. She met his gaze. Or until someone exposes them. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, checking his rifle. I'll take first watch. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Elena wrapped herself in her blanket, using her saddle as a pillow. The rock was hard beneath her, and the fire's warmth barely reached her corner. But she'd slept in worse places, chasing stories across the frontier. Just before she drifted off, she heard Wyatt speaking softly in Choctaw, a prayer maybe, or a promise. The words were foreign, but the tone was universal. a man preparing for battle, not with guns, but with something more dangerous: truth. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. In the morning, they would ride for Coyote Draw, where water sang through stones and powerful men schemed to silence that song. But for now, in this shelter carved by wind and time, two unlikely allies shared the peace of the storm's passing. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled again, wild, defiant, free. Elena smiled and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she would capture the West as it truly was. Tonight, she would dream of justice developing like a photograph in silver and light. When dawn came, painting the rocks blood red, they were ready. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp as a new blade. But Elena knew, as Wyatt surely did, that the real storm was just beginning. The territorial courthouse in Las Almas stood like a fortress of law against the lawlessness of the frontier. Elena adjusted her collar. She'd reluctantly donned a simple dress for this visit, knowing that judges were even less tolerant of women in trousers than sheriffs. Beside her, Wyatt looked uncomfortable in his town clothes, his weathered hands clutching a folder of carefully prepared documents. "Remember," Elena murmured as they climbed the steps, "we're just filing for water rights clarification. Nothing about the dynamite." They'd spent 3 days at Coyote Draw preparing for this moment. Elena had developed her plates in Wyatt's spring house, the cool darkness perfect for her chemicals. The images were clear, too clear. Not just the dynamite crates, but a second photograph she'd managed during their flight from town showed Crow's men placing survey stakes on what was clearly the Delgado Ranch. The courthouse clerk, a thin man named Josiah Pemberton, looked over his spectacles at them with barely concealed irritation. "Water rights are recorded in San Judas. Why come all the way to Las Almas?" "Because San Judas records seem to have inconsistencies," Wyatt said carefully. "My deed from '79 shows clear rights to Coyote Draw Spring, but Sheriff Pike claims there's a conflicting claim." "Conflicting claim?" Pemberton's pen scratched across his ledger. "From whom?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Elena interjected. "Mr. Hale simply wants to ensure his legal rights are protected." Pemberton sighed and disappeared into a back room. They could hear him pulling out heavy volumes, muttering about people wasting his time. Elena caught Wyatt's eye and nodded slightly. Everything was going according to plan. 20 minutes later, Pemberton returned with dust on his sleeves and confusion on his face. "This is most irregular. According to our records, the rights to Coyote Draw Spring were granted to one Wyatt Hale in 1879, filed proper with all fees paid. But there's a notation here from last month." "What kind of notation?" Wyatt leaned forward. "A pending claim filed by Crow Enterprises, stating prior Spanish grant rights that supersede yours." Pemberton adjusted his spectacles. "But I can find no record of any Spanish grant in that area. The only Spanish grants near San Judas are the Delgado Ranch and the old mission lands." Elena and Wyatt exchanged glances. "Could we see a copy of this pending claim?" "That's the irregular part. The claim references supporting documents, but they're not in the file." Pemberton looked troubled. "This isn't proper procedure. All supporting documents must be filed with the initial claim." The front door slammed open. Sheriff Pike strode in, his badge catching the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Behind him were 2 deputies Elena didn't recognize, hard-faced men who looked more like hired guns than lawmen. "Pemberton," Pike barked. "These 2 giving you trouble?" The clerk straightened his spine with surprising dignity. "No trouble, Sheriff. Simply conducting legal business, which I believe is still permitted in the territory." "Their legal business is done." Pike turned to Wyatt. "You're under arrest." "On what charge?" Elena demanded. "Destruction of railroad property. Blowing up track markers on the new spur line." Pike's smile was cold. 3 witnesses saw him near the site last night." "That's impossible," Elena said. "Mr. Hale was at his ranch last night. I can attest to that. Pike's eyes narrowed. Your word don't mean much. Miss Carter, especially since you're under arrest too. Conspiracy and improper behavior. Improper behavior isn't a legal charge, Pemberton protested. It is when I say it is. Pike gestured to his deputies. Take them. What happened next surprised everyone, including Elena. Wyatt moved like water, fluid and fast. He didn't draw his gun. That would have been suicide. But his shoulder caught the first deputy in the solar plexus while his boot swept the man's legs. The deputy went down hard. Run! Wyatt shouted to Elena. She grabbed the folder of documents from the counter and bolted for the side door. The second deputy lunged for her, but Pemberton, mild, thin Pemberton, stuck out his foot. The deputy sprawled across the floor, cursing. Elena burst into the alley beside the courthouse. Wyatt was right behind her. Pike's shouts echoing from inside. They ran through the maze of Las Almas's back streets, dodging laundry lines and startled chickens. The livery, Wyatt gasped. Our horses? They'll be watching it. Elena pulled him into a narrow space between two buildings. They pressed against the adobe walls, trying to quiet their breathing as footsteps pounded past. We need another way out of town, she whispered. Wyatt thought quickly. The Mexican Quarter. There's a woman there, Marisol Vega. She runs a boarding house. Her late husband rode with me on the good-night drives. They waited until the sounds of pursuit faded, then made their way carefully through the town. The Mexican Quarter was separate from the Anglo section, its own small world of adobe houses and garden plots. They found Marisol Vega's house by the sign painted on a wooden board, Habitaciones Limpias. Marisol was a handsome woman in her 40s, with silver threading through her black hair. She took one look at their flushed faces and ushered them inside without questions. Wyatt Hale, she said once the door was bolted. I heard you were in town. We need help. Mari, Pike's after us on false charges. Her face hardened. That man is no sheriff. He's Crow's dog, nothing more. She moved to the window, peering through curtains. They're searching house by house in the Anglo section. You have maybe an hour before they come here. Our horses are at the livery. I'll send my nephew Miguel. He'll bring them around back. Marisol studied Elena with intelligent eyes. You're the photographer lady, the one who tells truth with pictures. You've heard of me. All the Mexican families have heard. We know what Crow does, stealing land, poisoning wells, making people disappear. But who listens to us? She gestured bitterly. We need someone like you, someone whose words carry weight with Anglos. While they waited for Miguel, Marisol fed them beans and tortillas and told them what she knew. 2 nights ago, men came to the Delgado Ranch. They had papers, said the family had to leave by week's end. When old Fernando asked to see a judge, they beat him, broke his arm. The survey stakes, Elena breathed. They're moving fast. There's more, Marisol said. My cousin works at Crow's big house. She heard him talking about the railroad spur. It's not for regular freight. It's for moving machinery. Big pumps and pipes. They plan to drain the aquifer, sell the water to the mining camps for 10 times what farmers can pay. That would destroy every small ranch in the region, Wyatt said quietly. Turn the whole valley into dust. Si, but Crow will be rich, and that's all that matters to such men. Miguel arrived with the horses, having somehow extracted them from the livery without raising alarms. The boy was perhaps 15, with quick hands and clever eyes. They're searching the North Road, he reported. But the south trail along the river is clear. If you ride fast, you can reach the old mission by dark. Why the mission? Elena asked. Father Francisco, Marisol explained. He's documented every Spanish grant in the region. If anyone can prove the Delgado claim predates Crow's forgeries, it's him. They prepared to leave as shadows lengthened across the plaza. Marisol pressed a package into Elena's hands. food for the journey, and something wrapped in oilcloth. "My husband's journal," she said quietly. "From when he worked for Crow, before he knew what kind of man he was. There are things written there, things about water and dynamite and men who ask too many questions." Elena met the woman's eyes. "This could be dangerous for you if they find out." "Everything is dangerous for us. At least this danger has purpose." They left as darkness fell, walking the horses quietly through back alleys until they reached the river trail. Then they rode hard, the sound of hooves muffled by sandy soil. Behind them, Las Almas glowed with lantern light as Pike's men continued their search. The old mission of San Xavier sat in a valley between two mesas, its adobe walls silver in the moonlight. Built in 1701, it had survived Apache raids, Mexican independence, and American conquest. Now it served a scattered flock of Mexican and Indian families who found more comfort in its ancient peace than in the Protestant churches of the Anglo towns. Father Francisco was ancient himself, a bent figure in a brown robe who opened the heavy wooden doors without surprise. "Wyatt Hale," he said in accented English. "And the lady photographer. Come, I've been expecting you." "Expecting us?" Elena asked as they entered the candlelit sanctuary. "Marisol sent her youngest boy by the fast trail. He arrived an hour ago." The priest led them to a small room behind the altar. "You seek truth about land and water. I have such truths, written in Old Spanish and stored safely these many years." He produced a leather-bound volume, its pages yellow with age. "The Delgado Grant, 1782, 12,000 acres, including all water rights from the Ojo de Coyote to the Rio Seco." His gnarled finger traced the boundaries on a hand-drawn map. "And here, you see no grant was ever made in the lands Crow claims. Those were held by the Crown, then passed to Mexico, then to the United States. Public lands, never privately granted." "This is proof," Elena said excitedly. "Crow's claim is entirely fabricated." "See, but proof means nothing if it never reaches honest judges." Father Francisco closed the book carefully. "3 times I have tried to send these documents to the capital. 3 times my messengers have been waylaid." "We'll take them," Wyatt said. "Get them to the federal marshal in Prescott." The priest shook his head. "You'll never make it. Pike has men watching every road north." He smiled, revealing gaps in his teeth. "But there is another way. The old Apache trail through the mountains. Difficult, dangerous, but unknown to most Anglos." "I know it," Wyatt said slowly. "Ran cattle that way once to avoid rustlers. It'll add 3 days to the journey. Better 3 days than a bullet." Elena observed. They spent the night in the mission, sleeping on the hard floor of the sacristy. Elena developed 2 more plates she'd exposed in Las Almas, one showing Pike meeting with known criminals, another capturing the forged documents in the courthouse file. At dawn, Father Francisco blessed them and provided directions to the hidden trail. "Trust no one in the towns," he warned. "Crow's money reaches far, but in the mountains, you may find allies. The Apache still move through those passes. They have no love for Crow. His mines poison their sacred springs." They rode out as the sun painted the mountains crimson, the precious documents and photographic plates secured in Elena's saddlebags. The regular trail to Prescott lay to the northeast, broad and well-marked, but Wyatt turned southeast, toward peaks that looked like broken teeth against the sky. "Once we enter those mountains," he said, "there's no turning back. The trail's too narrow, too steep. We go through, Elena said firmly. "I didn't come this far to turn back now." As they climbed toward the mountain passes, Elena looked back one last time at the mission, small and serene in its valley. Father Francisco stood in the doorway, his hand raised in farewell or blessing. Somewhere behind them, Pike and his men were discovering their escape. The hunt would intensify now, but they had evidence, documentary and photographic, that could bring down Crow's empire of theft and lies. All they had to do was stay alive long enough to deliver it. The mountains loomed ahead, ancient and unforgiving. But as Wyatt had said, the stars didn't change, and sometimes, Elena reflected, that was all the navigation you needed. That, and someone beside you who understood that some fights were worth any risk. They climbed higher, leaving the desert behind, entering a world of pine and shadow where every sound might be pursuit and every trail might lead to freedom or death. The real West, Elena thought, adjusting her rifle across her saddle. Raw, dangerous, and nothing at all like the pretty pictures people wanted to see. But truth rarely was. The rain started just after midnight, turning the mountain trail into a river of mud. Elena pressed herself against the rocky wall of the narrow passage, trying to shield her photographic plates from the downpour. Ahead, Wyatt's silhouette moved carefully, testing each step before trusting his weight to the treacherous path. They'd been climbing for 2 days since leaving the mission, following trails that seemed more memory than reality. The Apache path Father Francisco had described was barely visible even in good weather. Now, with the rain turning every surface slick, it was nearly suicidal. "There," Wyatt called back, pointing through the darkness. "The old salt storage. We can shelter there." The salt storage turned out to be a cave system carved into the mountainside. Abandoned decades ago when better routes were found, the entrance was partially collapsed, but they managed to squeeze through with the horses. Inside, the cavern opened into a series of chambers, dry and surprisingly warm. "Apache used this before the salt traders," Wyatt explained, lighting a torch from their supplies. "See, the smoke marks on the ceiling goes back generations." Elena carefully unpacked her plates, relieved to find them undamaged. The documents from Father Francisco were wrapped in oilcloth, but she checked them anyway. Water was the enemy of both photograph and written word. "We'll wait out the storm here," Wyatt decided. "Trail's too dangerous in this weather." They made camp in the main chamber, where ancient fire rings showed others had done the same. Elena noticed how Wyatt chose a spot with clear sight lines to both the entrance and the deeper caves, always thinking defensively, even here, as their small fire pushed back the darkness. Exhaustion caught up with them. They'd been running for days, sleeping in snatches, constantly watching for pursuit. Here, with tons of rock between them and their enemies, they could finally rest. "Tell me about the cattle drives," Elena said, settling near the fire. "Marisol mentioned you rode with Goodnight." 6 years on the trails, Wyatt confirmed. "Started as a wrangler when I was 17. Worked my way up to trail boss. Good money if you survived it." "What made you quit?" He was quiet for a moment, feeding small sticks to the fire. "Got tired of taking orders from men who saw cattle as more valuable than the people driving them. Decided I'd rather have a small place of my own than a big share of someone else's dream." Elena understood that. It was why she worked alone, choosing her own subjects rather than accepting comfortable positions with established studios. "Wyatt," she said suddenly, "back in Las Almas, when Pike tried to arrest us, you could have drawn your gun. Why didn't you—" "Dead men can't testify in court," he said simply. "Besides, killing a lawman, even a corrupt one, would have made us outlaws for real. Hard to claim the moral high ground from a wanted poster." The practicality of it impressed her. So many men in the territory thought with their guns first. Wyatt used violence like any other tool, only when necessary, and with careful thought to consequences. Thunder echoed through the caves, and the rain intensified. They could hear water rushing somewhere below, underground streams swollen by the storm. Elena shivered despite the fire's warmth. "Here." Wyatt pulled a blanket from his pack and draped it around her shoulders. His hands lingered for just a moment, and Elena found herself leaning into the warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. You didn't have to involve yourself in this." "Yes, I did." His voice was quiet, but certain. "Men like Crow don't stop. Today it's the Delgados. Tomorrow another family, until everyone's driven out or broken. Someone has to stand up." even if it costs you everything. Especially then, my mother used to say, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Elena found herself studying his profile again. The strong jaw. The way his eyes never quite stopped checking their surroundings, even in rest. She thought about the gentle way he'd handled the horses, the respect he'd shown to Marisol and Father Francisco, the quick thinking that had saved them in Las Almas. "Wyatt," she began, then stopped. What was she going to say that she admired him, that his steady presence made her feel safe in a way she hadn't experienced since her father died? He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Elena." A sound echoed through the caves, not thunder, but hoofbeats. They both tensed, hands moving to weapons. The sound came again. Closer. "Put out the fire," Wyatt whispered. Elena smothered the flames with sand while Wyatt moved to the entrance. In the darkness, they waited, listening. The hoofbeats stopped just outside. "Hail, you in there," a voice called out. Not Pike or any of his men. This voice was younger, uncertain. "Who's asking?" Wyatt called back. "Tommy Morales, from Crow's crew. I need to talk to you. I'm alone, I swear." Elena remembered him, the young worker who'd been moving those dynamite crates in her photograph. Wyatt apparently recognized him too. "Throw your gun in first," Wyatt ordered. There was a clatter as a revolver landed on the cave floor. "I'm coming in slow. Don't shoot." Tommy Morales was perhaps 19, soaked to the skin and shaking. His horse stood outside, head hanging with exhaustion. Whatever had driven him here through the storm, it was urgent. "They're planning something bad," he said without preamble. "Real bad. That's why I came looking for you." "Slow down," Elena said, rekindling the fire. "Start from the beginning." Tommy accepted a cup of coffee with grateful hands. "I hired on with Crow 6 months ago. Needed the money. My family's farm was failing. At first it was just regular work, building, hauling. Then they started having us do other things. Moving dynamite at night, digging channels where they shouldn't be." "We know about the dynamite," Wyatt said. "What's the new plan?" "They're going to blow the dam at Coyote Draw, make it look like nature flash flood damage. Without that dam, all the small ranches below will dry up. Crow can buy them for nothing." Elena felt cold despite the fire. "When?" "Tomorrow night, during the new moon. Pike and 5 men are riding out at sunset with enough dynamite to take down half the mountain." "But there are families below that dam," Wyatt said, his voice deadly quiet. "The Hernandez place. The Johnson homestead." "I know." Tommy's young face was anguished. "That's why I'm here. My little sister lives at the Hernandez place. Married their oldest boy last spring. I can't let this happen." Elena's mind raced. They were still a day's ride from Coyote Draw by the mountain trail. And that was in good weather. The storm would slow them even more. "Is there a faster way?" she asked. "The old mine road," Wyatt said slowly. "It's been closed for years. Unstable. But it would cut the journey in half." "That's suicide," Tommy protested. "The road's washed out in places, and there are old shafts everywhere. One wrong step here or certain death for a dozen families there," Wyatt said grimly. "Not much choice." They prepared to leave immediately. The storm was still fierce, but time was now their enemy more than weather. Elena packed her plates and documents with extra care. If they didn't survive this, the evidence needed to... "I'm going with you," Tommy said. Wyatt studied him. "You betrayed Crow. He finds out. You're dead." "I'm dead anyway if I go back. Besides," the young man straightened his shoulders, "some things are worth more than money. My mother taught me that, even if I forgot for a while." They set out into the storm, 3 riders against the night. The mine road was a nightmare, barely wide enough for a horse, with sheer drops on one side and crumbling rock on the other. They had to dismount and lead the horses through the worst sections. Feeling their way in the darkness, hours passed in a blur of rain, wind, and treacherous footing. Once, Elena's horse slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought they'd both go over the edge. But Wyatt was there, strong hands steadying both her and the animal. "Almost there," he said, and she realized he'd been encouraging her for the last hour, his voice a constant reassurance in the storm. Dawn was breaking as they finally descended toward Coyote Draw. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Below them, the dam stood intact, a simple but effective structure of earth and timber that channeled the spring's flow to the ranches below. "We made it," Tommy breathed. "Not yet," Wyatt warned. Pike could already be in position. They approached carefully, using the rocks and scattered pines for cover. The valley seemed peaceful, morning mist rising from the water. Then Elena spotted movement near the dam's base. "There," she whispered. "2 men." Through her field glasses, she could see them clearly. Crow's men, already placing charges. They were early. "Must have ridden through the night, too," Wyatt muttered. "We need to stop them before—" A rifle shot cracked across the valley. Tommy cried out, clutching his shoulder as blood spread across his shirt. More shots followed, forcing them behind the rocks. Well, Sheriff Pike's voice carried across the distance. "Thought you might show up. Hale, Crow said you were predictable that way. Always trying to play hero." Elena did a quick count. 5 men, just as Tommy had said. Pike and 4 others, spread out in good defensive positions. They had the high ground and better cover. "Let the boy go. Pike," Wyatt called out. "He's nothing to you. He's a traitor and a thief. Stole a horse from Mr. Crow when he ran off." Pike laughed. "But I'm feeling generous. Throw out your guns and that camera woman's plates. Do that, and you can all ride away." Elena met Wyatt's eyes. They both knew Pike was lying. No witnesses would leave this valley if he had his way. "I need to get to the dam," Wyatt said quietly. "If those charges blow—" "You'll never make it. They'll cut you down in the open." "Not if they're distracted." He checked his rifle. "When I move, you cover me." "Wait," Elena said. An idea was forming. Desperate, but possible. "The old mine shafts Tommy mentioned. Are there any near here?" Tommy, pale but still conscious, nodded weakly. "Old copper shaft, about 50 yards behind Pike's position, boarded up years ago." "What are you thinking?" Wyatt asked. Elena smiled grimly. "That sometimes a photograph can change everything." She pulled out her flash powder magnesium for indoor photography. Dangerous in the wrong hands. This burns bright enough to blind a man in daylight, in a confined space like a mine shaft. Understanding dawned in Wyatt's eyes. It could cause an explosion, bring down the whole hillside. Or at least make them think it will. They planned quickly. Elena would circle around to the mine shaft while Wyatt kept Pike talking. Tommy, despite his wound, insisted on helping. He could still shoot with his left hand. Elena crept through the rocks, her photographer's eye automatically choosing the path with the best cover. Strange how skills translated. Reading light and shadow for art or survival used the same principles. The mine shaft was where Tommy had said, its entrance partially hidden by scrub brush. The boards were rotted, easy to pry loose. Inside, the shaft descended into darkness that seemed to swallow light. She could hear Pike still taunting Wyatt, demanding surrender. Time to change the game. Elena positioned her flash powder at the shaft entrance, then added some black powder from her pistol cartridges for good measure. The fuse was improvised from cloth soaked in gun oil. Not perfect, but it would serve. She lit the fuse and ran. The explosion, when it came, was spectacular. The flash powder ignited in a brilliant white flare visible even in daylight. The added gunpowder provided the bang, and the mine shaft funneled it all into a directed blast that shook the hillside. "The mountain's coming down," one of Pike's men screamed. In the confusion, Wyatt moved. He sprinted across open ground toward the dam, while Tommy laid down covering fire. Pike's men, convinced they were about to be buried under tons of rock, scattered. Elena reached her rifle just as Pike spotted Wyatt at the dam. The sheriff raised his gun, aiming for Wyatt's back. "No!" Elena's shot took Pike in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped, cursing. Wyatt worked frantically at the dam, pulling out charges and throwing them into the water. Each one that hit the stream died with a hiss, made harmless by the rushing water. "Fall back!" Pike shouted to his remaining men. "Fall back to town!" But two of his men were already running, spooked by the mine blast and the accurate fire from Tommy and Elena. The others dragged Pike to his horse, retreating under cover of wild shots that went nowhere near their targets. As quickly as it had started, it was over. The dam stood intact, the water flowing peacefully as if nothing had happened. Wyatt stood knee-deep in the stream, checking for any remaining charges. "Clear," he called finally. Elena ran to Tommy, who was sitting propped against a rock, grinning despite the blood on his shirt. "Did we win?" "We stopped them," Elena said, examining his wound. The bullet had passed through the muscle, painful but not life-threatening. "You did good, Tommy." "My sister's safe. That's what matters." Wyatt waded out of the stream, and suddenly Elena couldn't stand still. She ran to him, not caring about propriety or appearances. He caught her in his arms, holding her tight as she buried her face against his chest. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it," he corrected. "That mine shaft trick, brilliant." She pulled back to look at him, seeing her own relief mirrored in his eyes. There was something else there too, something that made her heart race faster than the danger had. But this wasn't the time. They had wounded to tend, evidence to preserve, and a long ride to the federal marshal still ahead. "Pike will be back," Tommy warned. "With more men." "Let him come," Wyatt said grimly. "We'll be ready." As the sun climbed higher, burning off the mist, Elena looked around the valley. The Hernandez ranch was visible in the distance, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney. Children would play there today, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster. This was why she did this work, she realized, not for the abstract concept of justice, but for the real people whose lives hung in the balance. People like Tommy, who'd risked everything to save his sister. Like Wyatt, who defended strangers as fiercely as family. "We should move," Wyatt said. "Get Tommy to a doctor, then ride hard for Prescott. With him as a witness and your photographs, we can end this," Elena finished. But she knew it wouldn't be that simple. Men like Crow didn't give up easily. The battle for Coyote Draw was won, but the war for the territory's soul was just beginning. Still, as they prepared the horses and bandaged Tommy's wound, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. They were three against an empire of greed, but they had truth on their side. Sometimes that was enough. The cabin sat sheltered in a grove of pines, halfway between Coyote Draw and the main trail to Prescott. Wyatt had built it years ago as a line shack for winter cattle work, but now it served as sanctuary. Rain drummed steadily on the roof as Elena changed the bandage on Tommy's shoulder, her hands gentle but efficient. "Hold still," she murmured as he winced. "Almost done." They'd ridden hard after the fight at the dam, putting distance between themselves and Pike's retreat. The federal marshal was still 2 days away, and they needed somewhere safe to rest and plan. The cabin, known only to Wyatt and a few trusted hands, provided that haven. Wyatt stood by the window, watching the trail through the rain-blurred glass. His Winchester rested within easy reach, but his posture had lost some of its tension. For the moment, they were safe. "How's the shoulder?" he asked Tommy without turning. "Better," the young man replied. Miss Elena's got a good touch with doctoring. My father taught me, Elena said, securing the fresh bandage. Said a photographer in the territories needed to know more than f-stops and exposure times. She smiled sadly. He was right about most things. The cabin was small, one room with a stone fireplace, rough furniture and supplies laid in for emergencies. But after days of running and sleeping rough, it felt like luxury. Elena had even managed to string a line across one corner to create a makeshift dark room for checking her plates. As evening approached, the rain intensified. Tommy dozed on the narrow cot, exhausted from blood loss and hard riding. Elena sat at the rough table, carefully examining the documents from Father Francisco by lamplight. Wyatt finally left his post by the window, satisfied that the weather would discourage pursuit. Find anything new? He asked, settling across from her. The Delgado grant is rock solid, Elena said. Every seal, every signature, all legitimate. But look here, she pointed to a notation in Spanish. This mentions water rights extending to all springs arising within the granted lands. That would include several sources Crow's been claiming, including the one he's already diverted to his mining operation. Wyatt's jaw tightened. No wonder he wants these documents destroyed. They worked in companionable silence, organizing evidence. Elena made notes about each photograph, creating a clear chain of documentation. Her neat handwriting filled pages as she built their case methodically. You're thorough, Wyatt observed. Truth is in the details. Anyone can make accusations. Proof requires precision. She glanced up at him. That's why your testimony will be crucial. A respected rancher's word carries weight. Respected might be stretching it, he said wryly. Half the town thinks I'm difficult for not selling to Crow. The other half knows you're honest. That matters more. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and the lamp flame flickered. Wyatt rose to check the fire, adding another log. The warmth pushed back the damp chill seeping through the walls. Storm's settling in for the night, he said. We're not going anywhere until morning. Elena nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at spending the night in such close quarters. It was hardly improper. Tommy's presence and their circumstances made it necessary. Still, she was acutely aware of Wyatt's every movement. I'll take first watch, she offered. No need. This weather's better than any guard. Nobody's riding in this. He moved to the cabin's single shelf, producing a bottle and 2 glasses. Whiskey, medicinal purposes. Medicinal? Elena agreed with a small smile. They sat by the fire, the whiskey warming them from within. Tommy's soft snores provided a rhythmic counterpoint to the rain. For the first time in days, Elena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Wyatt nodded. That day in town, when you helped me with Pike, you didn't know me, had no reason to get involved. Why did you? He considered, rolling the glass between his palms. Saw a woman doing honest work getting hassled for no good reason. Didn't sit right. He paused. Plus, I recognize something in you. What? That look. Same one I see in the mirror some mornings. Someone who's lost family to powerful men and their greed. His voice was soft. Takes one to know one, I guess. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been alone with her mission for so long. She'd forgotten what understanding felt like. Tell me about her, she said. Your mother. Wyatt stared into the fire. Mary Walking Crow. That was her Choctaw name. She took my father's name when they married, Mary Hale, but I think she always felt torn between worlds. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She could track better than any man, knew every plant and its use, made the best cornbread I ever tasted. She sounds remarkable. She tried to teach me the old ways, but I was young, more interested in horses and guns. Regret colored his voice. Wish I'd listened better. You remember enough, Elena said gently. I've seen how you read the land, how you move. She's still with you. He looked at her then, something shifting in his expression. What about you? What drives Elena Carter to risk everything for strangers? Elena sipped her whiskey, gathering thoughts. Have you ever seen something so wrong it changes you? Not just unfair, but fundamentally against everything you thought the world should be. Yes. That's what happened when they killed my father. He was a good man, honest to a fault. All he did was refuse to falsify a survey that would have sent a train through unstable ground. 50 people might have died if that track was built as planned. Her voice hardened. They shot him in his own office. Made it look like robbery. I was 17. Elena! Wyatt reached across the small space between them, his hand covering hers. I decided that night I'd find a way to fight back, not with guns, I'm no killer, but with truth, undeniable, documented truth. She turned her hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. Every photograph I take of men like Crow, every lie I expose, it's for my father, for all the fathers who just try to do right. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Their joined hands rested on the rough wooden arm of her chair, and Elena marveled at how natural it felt. Wyatt's thumb traced small circles on her palm, the gentle touch at odds with his calloused skin. We make a good team, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. We do. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Elena knew she should pull away, maintain the professional distance that had served her well. But something in Wyatt's eyes held her, not desire alone, though that was there, but understanding, recognition, a shared knowledge of loss and purpose that went deeper than attraction. She stood, needing movement, needing space to think, but she didn't release his hand, and he rose with her. They stood face to face in the firelight, the rain a constant music around them. Elena, he said, her name a question and answer all at once. She stepped closer, free hand rising to rest against his chest. Through the worn cotton of his shirt, she felt his heart beating strong and slightly fast. I've been alone a long time, she whispered. By choice. It was easier that way. I know, he said simply. So have I. She looked up at him, seeing her own reflected loneliness and hope. I'm frightened, she admitted. Not of Pike or Crow, of feeling. Safe, he supplied. Like you could finally set down the weight you've been carrying. Yes, the word came out broken. How did you know? Because that's what I feel with you. His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. First time in 15 years I don't feel like I'm fighting the world alone. Elena turned her face into his palm, pressing her lips to the warm skin. She felt him shudder slightly, his control wavering. Your chest is home, she murmured against his hand, the words coming from somewhere deep and true. These past days, when everything was chaos, I'd look at you and feel anchored. Wyatt made a sound low in his throat, gathering her against him. She went willingly, her arms encircling his waist as she pressed her cheek to his chest. He held her tight, one hand tangled in her hair, the other spread protectively across her back. For a long moment they simply stood there, holding each other while the storm raged outside. Then Wyatt pulled back just enough to see her face. His eyes asked a question she answered by rising on her toes. Their lips met softly at first, tentative as morning light. Then Elena sighed against his mouth and the kiss deepened, became something needful yet tender. He kissed her with a hunger too tender to deny, passionate but respectful, giving as much as taking. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Wyatt rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. I want to court you proper, he said roughly. When this is over, do things right. Elena smiled through fresh tears. I'd like that, though I should warn you, I'll still wear trousers and take photographs of things powerful men don't want seen. Wouldn't want you any other way. He kissed her forehead, then each eyelid, butterfly soft touches that made her heart ache sweetly. Strong, stubborn, seeing beauty and truth where others just see territory to claim. They stood wrapped in each other while the fire burned low. Eventually, propriety and Tommy's presence reasserted themselves. They stepped apart, though Wyatt kept hold of her hand. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be hard riding." "What about you?" "I'll watch a while longer. Too much in my head for sleep just yet." Elena understood. Her own thoughts were spinning, heart still racing from their kisses, but exhaustion was a weight on her shoulders. Days of tension demanding payment. She squeezed his hand once more, then moved to the corner where she'd laid out her bedroll. As she settled under the blankets, she watched Wyatt return to the window. He stood silhouetted against the darkness, keeping watch as he'd promised. "Wyatt," she called softly. He turned. "Thank you for seeing me. Not just the photographer or the woman in trousers, but me." Even across the room, she could see his smile. "Thank you for letting yourself be seen." Elena closed her eyes, holding those words close. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains. But inside the small cabin, wrapped in warmth and newfound connection, she felt safer than she had in years. Tomorrow, they would ride for Prescott and justice. Tonight, she would sleep knowing she was no longer alone in the fight, and that knowledge, fragile and precious as her glass plates, was worth any risk that lay ahead. As sleep finally claimed her, Elena's last coherent thought was of home. Not a place, but a feeling. The solid warmth of Wyatt's chest under her cheek, the steady beat of his heart, the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. The rain sang against the windows, and somewhere in the darkness, a man who'd forgotten how to hope stood watch over dreams he was only beginning to believe might come true. The 917 to Las Almas was already building steam when they reached the depot. Elena pulled her hat low. Scanning the platform while Wyatt purchased tickets, Tommy, his arm in a sling but mobile, kept watch near the baggage car. They'd decided to risk the train. 3 days of hard riding had left them exhausted, and the documents needed to reach the federal authorities quickly. 3 tickets to the end of the line, Wyatt told the clerk, a nervous man who kept glancing toward the sheriff's office across the street. That'll be $12, sir." The clerk's hands shook as he counted change. "You folks traveling on business?" "Something like that," Wyatt replied evenly. They boarded quickly, choosing seats in the middle car where they could watch both directions. Elena kept her satchel close. Inside were the precious glass plates and documents, wrapped in oilcloth and padding, the evidence that could topple Crow's empire of theft. The whistles shrieked and the train lurched forward. Elena allowed herself a small sigh of relief as the depot fell away behind them. They'd made it aboard without incident. "Too easy," Wyatt murmured, echoing her thoughts. "Maybe Pike hasn't figured out we're heading for the train," Tommy suggested hopefully. "Pike always figures things out," Wyatt said. "Question is what he'll do about it." The answer came an hour into the journey. Elena was dozing, lulled by the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails, when Wyatt's hand on her arm brought her alert. A man had entered their car from the rear, well-dressed, carrying a leather portfolio, looking every inch the successful businessman. Elena recognized him immediately. James Morrison, Crow's legal advisor, the man in the silver-banded hat from her first photographs. He moved down the aisle with practiced ease, stopping at their seats with a cold smile. "Mr. Hale, Miss Carter, and young Thomas." Morrison tipped his hat mockingly. "What a pleasant surprise." "Morrison," Wyatt acknowledged, hand resting casually near his coat. Now, no need for unpleasantness." Morrison produced a document from his portfolio. "I'm here on legal business." This is a warrant for the seizure of any and all photographic materials in Miss Carter's possession deemed necessary for territorial security. Elena examined the paper. It looked official, bearing the seal of a circuit judge. Judge Harrington, isn't he the one who ruled in favor of Crow's water claims last year? Judge Harrington is a respected member of the judiciary, Morrison replied smoothly. His warrant is quite legal. Legal and right aren't always the same thing, Elena said. Philosophy aside, I'm authorized to search your belongings. Morrison gestured, and two men entered the car, rough types who looked more comfortable in a saloon brawl than a legal proceeding. The other passengers began to take notice, some shrinking away, others leaning forward with interest. A woman with two small children gathered them close, eyeing the confrontation nervously. This is a public conveyance, Wyatt said calmly. You have no authority here. On the contrary, this train travels through Crow Company lands. We have every authority. Morrison's smile widened. Hand over the photographs, Miss Carter, and we can all continue our journey peacefully. Elena stood, clutching her satchel. These photographs are my legal property. You have no right. One of Morrison's thugs reached for the bag. Tommy, despite his injured arm, lunged forward to block him. The man backhanded the boy, sending him sprawling into the aisle. That was a mistake. The woman with children cried out in protest. The elderly gentleman stood up, cane raised. How dare you strike that injured boy? Madam, sir, please remain seated, Morrison said, his smooth demeanor cracking slightly. This is legal business. Legal business doesn't include assault, another passenger called out, a Methodist minister by his collar. I saw that man attack without provocation. The mood in the car shifted palpably. Western folk might respect law and order, but they respected fair play more. Striking an injured youth violated both. Wyatt helped Tommy back to his seat, then turned to Morrison. You've overplayed your hand. Have I? Morrison produced a silver whistle. One signal brings 20 armed men from the next car. Is that what you want? A bloodbath over some photographs? You're bluffing, Elena said, though her heart raced. Even Crow wouldn't dare. The train lurched suddenly, brakes screaming against rails. Passengers tumbled forward as the cars ground to a halt. Through the windows, Elena could see why. A pile of rocks across the tracks, too large to be natural. Ah, Morrison said with satisfaction. Right on schedule. Men on horseback appeared alongside the train, rifles prominent. Pike led them, his arm still in a sling from Elena's shot, but his expression murderous. The passengers murmured in fear and anger. Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison announced, please remain calm. We're simply conducting a legal search for stolen property. Cooperate, and no one will be hurt. Stolen, Elena's voice carried through the car. These men work for Silas Crow, who's stealing land and water from honest families. I have photographic proof of his crimes. Lies and slander, Morrison countered. This woman is a troublemaker who wears trousers and takes pictures. The elderly gentleman stood again, cane planted firmly. I've heard about you, Miss Carter. You documented the truth about the Baxter mine collapse last year, saved lives with your photographs. Other passengers began to speak up. The minister mentioned hearing about Crow's aggressive business practices. A farmer complained about water mysteriously drying up near Crow's operations. The woman with children said her cousin lost their homestead to suspicious legal claims. Morrison's control of the situation eroded with each testimony. His thugs looked uncertain, glancing between him and the growing crowd of hostile passengers. Enough, Pike's voice boomed from outside. Everyone out of the train, now! You can't order us around, a burly miner protested. We paid our fare. Out, or we start shooting through windows. Pike threatened. That might have worked, except the train's engineer chose that moment to lean out of his cab. Any man fires on my train answers to the railroad company. And believe me, they've got more lawyers than even Crow can handle. It was a standoff. Pike's men outside, Morrison's authority crumbling inside, and a trainload of passengers whose sympathies had clearly shifted to Elena's side. Then young Tommy did something unexpected, despite his pain. He stood and addressed the car. "My name is Thomas Morales. I worked for Crow until 3 days ago. I helped move the dynamite they planned to use on the Coyote Draw Dam. They wanted to flood out the small ranchers, including my sister's family." Gasps rippled through the car. Morrison paled. That's preposterous," he stammered. "The boy's delirious from his injury." "I'm not," Tommy continued steadily. "I saw the plans, helped dig the channels to redirect water to Crow's mines. He told us it was legal, but we all knew better. I couldn't stand by and let families die for his greed." "Shut your mouth, boy," Morrison snarled, his composed mask finally slipping. "The truth needs telling," Tommy replied. "Miss Carter has photographs proving everything I'm saying. That's why they're so desperate to stop her." The train car erupted. Passengers shouted questions and accusations. Morrison's thugs backed toward the door, overwhelmed by the angry crowd. Outside, Pike's men sat their horses uneasily as word spread through the other cars. Wyatt stood, his presence commanding attention. "Folks, we're trying to get evidence of Crow's crimes to federal authorities. These men want to stop us. You've heard the testimony. You decide what's right." "I'll tell you what's right." The woman with children stood, fierce as any gunfighter. "Protecting our families from men who'd flood us out for profit. Let these people through." "Let them through," others took up the cry. Morrison made one last attempt. "I have a legal warrant." "Your warrant isn't worth the paper it's printed on." The minister declared, "Not when it serves injustice." The crowd pressed forward, forcing Morrison and his men to retreat. They tumbled out of the car, Morrison's dignity in tatters. Pike spurred his horse forward, furious. "You people are interfering with the law." "Your law!" The engineer called out, "Not ours. Now clear those tracks, or I'll wire the railroad company about this illegal detention. They'll have federal marshals here by sundown." Pike looked ready to order his men to fire anyway, but even he could see the situation had spiraled beyond control. The entire train was roused now, passengers leaning from windows, shouting support for Elena and condemnation of Crow. "This isn't over," Pike snarled at Wyatt through the window. "Not by a long shot." "No," Wyatt agreed. "It's just beginning." It took an hour to clear the tracks, Pike's men working sullenly under the watchful eyes of angry passengers. When the train finally resumed its journey, Elena found herself overwhelmed by well-wishers. People shook her hand, shared their own stories of Crow's predations, offered assistance. "Never seen anything like it," Tommy marveled, wincing as someone jostled his shoulder. "Folks usually keep their heads down around Crow's men." "Sometimes people just need someone to stand up first," Wyatt said. "Show them it's possible to fight back." Elena carefully returned her satchel to her lap, the weight of evidence and responsibility heavy in her hands. They'd won this skirmish. But Morrison was right about one thing. It wasn't over. Crow would respond to this public humiliation with escalation. As the train climbed into the mountain passes, she gazed out at the landscape rushing by. Somewhere behind them, Pike was no doubt planning his next move. Ahead waited the federal marshal and the hope of real justice. "You did well," Wyatt said quietly, his hand finding hers between the seats. "Turning the people to our side like that." "They turned themselves," Elena replied. "They just needed to know they weren't alone." The train whistle echoed off canyon walls as they climbed higher, carrying their truth toward judgment. Through the window, Elena caught a glimpse of an eagle soaring above the peaks, wild, free, untouchable. Like justice itself, she thought. Hard to catch, harder to kill, but worth every effort to preserve. The train carried them forward, and with them the hopes of every family threatened by powerful men who thought ownership extended to people's very lives. Morrison had asked if she was willing to risk bloodshed for some photographs. The answer, Elena realized, was yes, but not just for the images, for what they represented, for the truth they told, for the future they might help secure. The 917 to Las Almas had become something more than a simple train ride. It had become a declaration that the people would not go quietly into Crow's vision of progress. And that, Elena thought with grim satisfaction, was a photograph worth taking. The morning sun painted San Judas's Main Street gold as Elena. Wyatt and Reverend Whitlow carried their makeshift platform to the town square. Word had spread like wildfire through the Mexican Quarter and outlying ranches today. Truth would have its hearing, whether the law permitted it or not. Right here, Whitlow directed, his aged face set with determination. They positioned the platform near the old cottonwood tree, where the whole town could see. Elena stretched a large canvas frame between two posts, while Wyatt hammered supports into place. "You sure about this?" Wyatt asked quietly. "Federal marshals still 2 days out." Elena replied, "Pike's regrouping. If we wait, evidence has a way of disappearing, or witnesses do." She'd spent the night in Marisol Vega's back room, developing her most crucial plates into large prints. The images were stark, undeniable. Crow's men placing dynamite, the forged documents, survey stakes on the Delgado land. But the centerpiece was a new photograph, taken just yesterday when they'd stopped at the Delgado ranch to check on old Fernando's broken arm. It showed the entire family, 3 generations standing before their adobe home. The land grant document displayed proudly, the mountains their ancestors had known rising behind them. It was dignity personified, humanity that no legal manipulation could erase. "They're coming!" Tommy called from his lookout position. Despite his still-healing shoulder, he'd insisted on helping. People flowed into the square from every direction. The Mexican families came first, dressed in their Sunday best despite it being Thursday. Then the small ranchers, the shopkeepers who'd been squeezed by Crow's monopolies. Even some of the saloon girls who worked the establishments Crow didn't own. Marisol stepped forward, her voice carrying across the growing crowd. "My friends, we gather because the courts will not hear us, because the sheriff serves money, not justice. But today, we make our own court, the court of truth, witnessed by all." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. More people arrived, including several prominent townsmen who usually avoided taking sides. The crowd swelled to over 100, an unprecedented gathering for San Judas. Elena unveiled the first photograph, the dynamite at Coyote Draw. Gasps arose from those who hadn't heard Tommy's testimony. She let the image speak for itself, then moved to the next, building the story visually. "Lies!" The voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Silas Crow himself strode into the square, flanked by a dozen armed men. He wore his usual black suit, but his composure showed cracks. "This is an illegal assembly, spreading slander against a lawful businessman." "Then let's hear from someone who worked for that businessman," Reverend Whitlow said calmly. He gestured to Tommy, who stepped onto the platform. The young man's voice shook at first, then steadied as he told his story. The midnight runs, the dynamite, the plans to flood out families. When he mentioned his sister at the Hernandez ranch, several women in the crowd crossed themselves. "The boy's a thief and a liar," Crow declared. "He stole from me and now spreads tales to cover his crimes." "I stole nothing but the truth," Tommy replied with surprising dignity. "And I'm not the only one who knows it." That was the signal. From the crowd stepped Miguel Hernandez, Roberto Sandoval, even William Johnson from the Anglo side of town, all small ranchers whose water had mysteriously begun to fail after refusing Crow's offers. "My well ran strong for 20 years, Johnson said, his weathered face grim. Month after Crow's inspection, it went dry. Had to sell half my herd. Coincidence, Crow said, but his voice lacked conviction. 7 coincidences. Roberto Sandoval stepped forward. 7 families who said no to you. 7 wells that failed. The crowd stirred angrily. These were their neighbors, people they'd known for years. The pattern was too clear to deny. Elena unveiled another photograph. Crow meeting with known criminals outside the old mission. Then another, the forged documents from the courthouse, with each image. The crowd's murmur grew louder. "Where's Sheriff Pike?" someone called out. "Why isn't he keeping order?" "He's coming," Wyatt said quietly, his hand near his pistol. Sure enough, Pike appeared at the far end of the street with more armed men, but he stopped short. Seeing the size of the crowd, "Now comes the moment of testing," Reverend Whitlow murmured. But before Pike could act, a new voice rang out. "I have something to say." The crowd parted for James Morrison, Crow's legal advisor, but something was different. His usual polish was gone, replaced by a haunted expression. He climbed onto the platform uninvited. "Jim, what are you doing?" Crow's voice held warning. Morrison ignored him, facing the crowd. "My name is James Morrison. For 3 years, I've served as legal counsel to Crow Enterprises." He paused, swaying slightly. "I've done terrible things in the name of progress and profit, forged documents, bribed officials, helped steal what couldn't be bought." The square erupted. Crow started forward, but the crowd closed ranks, blocking him. "Why now?" Elena asked Morrison quietly. He looked at her with bloodshot eyes. "Yesterday on the train, that woman with children, she looked just like my sister. Same fierce protection of family. I realized I'd become something she'd despise." His voice broke. "I have a daughter back east. What legacy am I leaving her?" "Jim," Crow's composure finally shattered. "You're destroying everything we've built." "Everything we've stolen," Morrison corrected. He reached into his coat, producing a leather journal. Names, dates, amounts. Every bribe, every forgery, every accident that befell those who wouldn't sell. Wyatt took the journal, flipping through pages of damning evidence. "This is enough to hang you both." Probably. Morrison agreed wearily. "But at least I'll hang with some shred of honor restored." The drama might have ended there, but Crow wasn't finished. His hand moved toward his coat, and Wyatt saw the gesture. "Gun!" Wyatt shouted, pushing Elena aside as Crow drew a hidden derringer. The shot cracked across the square. Women screamed, men ducked. But Crow's target wasn't Elena or Wyatt, it was Morrison. The lawyer clutched his side, crimson spreading across his white shirt. "Murderer!" Marisol's voice rose above the chaos. "You all saw he shot an unarmed man." Crow stood frozen, the smoking gun in his hand, seeming to realize what he'd done. His men backed away, unwilling to compound murder with more violence before 100 witnesses. "Doctor," Elena pressed her hands against Morrison's wound. "Someone fetch Dr. Hansen." The crowd surged forward, no longer content to watch. Crow's men formed a protective circle, but they were vastly outnumbered. Pike and his deputies hesitated at the edge of the square, calculating odds. "Stand down." "Pike," a new voice commanded. Deputy Federal Marshal John Carpenter rode into the square, badge gleaming, rifle across his saddle. Behind him were 6 more federal officers. "Nobody move." "Thank God," Whitlow breathed. The federal men had received Elena's telegram and ridden hard from Prescott. Carpenter surveyed the scene, the wounded Morrison, Crow with the gun, the photographs displayed for all to see. "Silas Crow, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud against the United States government." Carpenter's voice brooked no argument. "Sheriff Pike, you're relieved of duty pending investigation." "You can't," Pike began. I can and I am. Carpenter gestured to his men. Disarm them. What followed was almost anticlimactic. Crow's hired guns, faced with federal authority and an angry crowd, surrendered their weapons without resistance. Pike blustered but complied when Carpenter threatened to charge him with obstruction. Doctor. Hansen arrived, working quickly on Morrison. He'll live, he announced after tense minutes. Bullet missed the vitals. As Crow was led away in shackles, he turned to Elena with naked hatred. You've destroyed everything, the progress, the prosperity. Built on theft and lies, she interrupted. That's not progress. It's just greed wearing a suit. The crowd began to disperse, but not before many stopped to shake Elena's hand or pat Wyatt's shoulder. The Delgado family wept with relief. Tommy's sister embraced him, careful of his wounded shoulder. You did it, Marisol said to Elena. Oh, you gave us justice. We all did it, Elena corrected. I just provided pictures. You all provided courage. As the federal marshals organized their prisoners and evidence, Wyatt found Elena sitting on the platform steps. Suddenly exhausted, he sat beside her, their shoulders touching. It's over, he said quietly. This part is... She looked at the photographs still displayed, stories of greed and resistance, loss and hope. But there are crows in every territory, every state. The work's never really done. No, he agreed. But maybe it doesn't have to be done alone. She turned to him, seeing in his eyes the same question she felt in her heart. Before she could answer, Marshal Carpenter approached. Miss Carter, Mr. Hale, I'll need you both to come to Prescott. Your testimony will be crucial. He tipped his hat. Fine work here, both of you. As they prepared to leave, Elena looked back at the square. Already, life was returning to normal. Vendors setting up stalls, children playing, ordinary people going about ordinary lives. But something had changed. They'd stood together, faced down power, and won. Ready? Wyatt asked, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. Ready, she said, taking it. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool. Somewhere in the crowd, someone started singing an old Mexican ballad about justice rolling down like water. Others joined in, voices mixing in imperfect harmony. Elena smiled. Despite everything, the danger past, the struggles ahead, the weight of what they'd witnessed. This was why she did this work. Not for abstract ideals, but for these people, this moment, this proof that sometimes truth could triumph over power. The wagon rolled out of San Judas, carrying them toward whatever came next. Behind them, a town began the slow work of healing. Ahead lay testimony, trials, and the promise of a future where water rights meant more than might. And in between, two people who'd found each other in the fight discovered that some battles were best fought hand in hand. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across Coyote Draw as Elena adjusted her camera for one last photograph. The valley had transformed since Crow's arrest. Water flowed freely again. The small ranches thrived, and the community had found new strength in their shared victory. Hold still. She called to the group assembled before Wyatt's ranch house. The Delgado family stood proud with their validated land grant. Tommy Morales grinned beside his sister and her children. Marisol Vega held court in the center, and even crusty William Johnson had cleaned up for the occasion. This for your book? Johnson asked. The last photograph, Elena confirmed. The one that shows what we protected. She'd spent the months since the trial documenting the recovery. Her testimony had helped convict Crow of conspiracy and attempted murder. Pike faced his own reckoning, while Morrison, surprisingly, had survived to turn state's evidence. His cooperation led to a complete restructuring of water rights in the territory. The shutter clicked, capturing the moment. As Elena emerged from beneath the camera cloth, she found Wyatt waiting with a glass of fresh lemonade. Thought you might be thirsty, he said, that small smile she'd grown to love playing at his lips. Always thinking ahead, she teased, accepting the drink gratefully. The past months had been a whirlwind. The trial, establishing her photography studio in San Judas, helping families reclaim their rights. Through it all, Wyatt had been there, steady as the mountains. He'd courted her properly as promised, though their version of proper included him helping her develop plates and her teaching him the basics of photography. "Everyone's gathering for the celebration," he said, gesturing toward the tables set up near the spring. The community had decided to mark the restoration of their water rights with a harvest festival. Tables groaned under the weight of tamales, roasted corn, fresh bread, and pies made from the season's fruit. Children ran between the adults, their laughter bright as the stream that bubbled endlessly from the rocks. Elena packed her equipment carefully, then walked with Wyatt toward the celebration. The new water wheel he'd installed turned steadily, its mechanical rhythm a counterpoint to the natural music of the spring. Beside it stood a small generator, Wyatt's latest innovation, bringing electric light to the valley. "Progress done right," she murmured. "Only kind worth having," he agreed. Reverend Whitlow raised his hand for attention, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Friends, we celebrate today not just water and harvest, but community. We've learned that when we stand together, no force of greed can prevail against us." "Hear, hear," voices called out. "I'm told," Whitlow continued with a twinkle in his eye, "that we have another cause for celebration. Wyatt Elena." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as Wyatt took her hand. They'd planned to announce it quietly, but apparently secrets didn't keep in small communities. "Miss Carter has agreed to marry me," Wyatt said simply, his voice carrying surprising emotion. "Come spring, if you'll all do us the honor of witnessing." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in San Judas. Marisol was the first to embrace Elena, whispering, "About time, mija." As congratulations flowed, Elena found herself overwhelmed by the warmth of acceptance. These people had become her family, this valley her home in ways she'd never expected when she'd stepped off that dusty stagecoach. "Speech," Tommy called out, his arm finally healed and strong. "From the lady who saved us all." "I didn't save anyone," Elena protested, but friendly hands pushed her onto a makeshift platform. Looking out at the faces, Mexican and Anglo, farmers and shopkeepers, all united by shared struggle and victory, she found her voice. "When I came here, I thought I was just taking photographs, documenting the truth of the frontier." She paused, meeting Wyatt's encouraging gaze. "But I learned truth isn't just about what the camera sees. It's about people choosing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. It's about communities that refuse to be divided by those who profit from our separation." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "The real West," she continued, "isn't about gunfights and glory. It's about families like the Delgados keeping faith with their ancestors. It's about young men like Tommy choosing conscience over comfort. It's about all of you, building something worth protecting in this hard land." She raised her glass of lemonade. "To the true West, may it always be stronger than those who would steal it." "The true West," the crowd echoed, raising their own drinks. As the celebration continued into evening, Elena found a quiet moment by the spring. The water sang over the rocks, the same song it had sung for centuries. Soon, electric lights would glow in the darkness, but the ancient rhythm would remain. "Your chest is home," she whispered, remembering that night in the rain-soaked cabin. "What was that?" Wyatt appeared beside her, drawn by some invisible thread that always seemed to connect them. "Just remembering." She leaned into his solid warmth. "Thinking how far we've come." "And how far we'll go." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Got a letter yesterday from a rancher up near Flagstaff. Seems they're having similar troubles with a mining company claiming water rights." Elena looked up at him. "You thinking of getting involved?" "We're thinking of it," he corrected. "Partners. Remember?" She smiled. I'll need to order more plates. Already did. They'll arrive next week. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the celebration took on a magical quality. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies. Guitars appeared, and dancing began. Elena watched it all with her photographer's eye, but also with her heart, no longer the observer, but part of the tapestry. "Dance with me," Wyatt said, pulling her toward the cleared area where couples swayed to a gentle waltz. "You know I'm terrible at dancing," she protested. "You're terrible at sitting still," he corrected. "Dancing is just moving with purpose." They joined the other couples, finding their rhythm. Around them, the community they'd helped save celebrated not just victory, but life itself. Children dozed in their mother's arms. Old men shared stories of other battles won and lost. Young couples stole kisses in the shadows. "I have something for you," Wyatt said as they danced. He produced a small leather journal. "Thought you might need this for your book." Elena opened it to find pages of his neat handwriting, observations about the land, the people, the struggle they'd shared. But more than that, she found his perspective on their journey, details she'd missed while focused on her camera. "Wyatt, this is..." Words failed her. "Every story needs multiple views," he said softly. "You taught me that." As the music slowed, Elena pressed close to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Around them, their chosen family celebrated under stars that witnessed all sorrow and joy, defeat and triumph, the eternal dance of life on the frontier. "Look," someone called. "The lights!" Wyatt's generator hummed to life, and suddenly the valley glowed with soft electric light, not harsh or glaring, but gentle progress that honored rather than conquered. The children gasped in wonder, and even the adults stood amazed. "The future," Reverend Whitlow said softly, "built on justice, powered by community." Elena thought of her father, wondered if he could see this moment. His daughter had found her purpose, her place, her person. The truth he'd died defending lived on in every photograph, every testimony, every choice to stand against power. "Time for one more picture," she decided. "Everyone by the water wheel." They gathered in the soft electric glow, all of them, the entire community that had refused to be broken. Elena set the timer and ran to join them, finding her place beside Wyatt just as the shutter clicked. Later, when that photograph was developed, it would show more than faces. It would capture a moment when ordinary people proved extraordinary, when truth prevailed over lies, when water sang freely over ancient stones while new light blessed old dreams. But for now, Elena simply lived it, the warmth of Wyatt's hand in hers, the laughter of friends, the promise of tomorrows where justice flowed as surely as water from the spring. The frontier was changing. Let it come, she thought. They'd meet it together, with photographs and principle, love and law, community and courage. The real West, raw, difficult, beautiful, would endure because people like these would always stand guard over what mattered. As the celebration continued under stars and electric light alike, Elena knew that some stories never really end. They just flow on like water, finding new channels, nurturing new growth, always moving toward the sea of possibility. And in the heart of it all, two people who'd found home in each other stood witness to the truth that no photograph could fully capture, that sometimes, against all odds, love and justice could prevail. The water sang on, eternal and free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these Wild West tales. Please share in the comments below where you're listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts about Elena and Wyatt's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night and give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier stories of love, justice, and courage. Your support means the world and helps keep these tales of the Old West alive.